What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger, episode 5. This episode came out this weekend, and unfortunately I was not able to upload a video for it. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't actually find a subbed version of the episode. So that's why it's coming up super late. In fact, it's coming up after I did my Hyperforce review, which means it's really late. But at the same time, it's a one-time thing. I'm sure next week will be better. Again, this is very early, so these problems do happen when it comes to new seasons, so keep it in mind if you're wondering why it's taking so long for this episode. That's why. As far as things go with this episode, it was actually pretty good. We got to see Destra, DeGranio's right hand, actually fighting the Lupinrangers and Patourangers this episode, which was very cool. We got to see a new villain for the episode, and we also got to see two new mechas. You know, one's a dial fighter, one's a trigger machine. So that's very, very cool to know, and I'm glad to know that that is the case. As far as things go, the episode was called Targeted the International Police. And as far as what's, when the international police are being targeted, it's right away at the very beginning. Because what happens is that we see that, I believe it is Hilltop, comes from an airport. He has a suitcase with him, and he's trying to bring it back to the GSPO. In the meantime, what we also see is that the Lupinrangers are trailing a monster known as Bumdalt. And the thing is that Bumdalt ends up going after this suitcase. Because what happens is that Destra appears and he informs Bumdalt of the suitcase that the GSPO are actually retrieving. And so what happens is that Bumdalt goes to that police car. He ends up trying to get the suitcase because he knows what's inside of it. And what happens is that he eventually does end up stealing it from Hilltop and beats him a little bit. And following this, what we do end up seeing is that he gets the suitcase. The Lupinrangers end up fighting Bumdalt, and what does end up happening is that eventually Lupinranger actually manages to get out one of the one of the two items that are inside the case. They see that both of them are in there. Which Lupin collection items are there? There is the Cyclone or the helicopter. That'd be the dial fighter and the biker dial fighter. So what they I said the exact opposite way. The dial fighter is the helicopter, and the biker is the trigger machine. So what we do end up seeing is that Lupinranger manages to get the trigger machine, not the dial fighter, which is kind of interesting because under normal circumstances he would be using the dial fighter, not the trigger machine, but he gets the trigger machine one. So that's important. At the same time, the Patourangers do end up arriving because Hilltop calls for backup from Agent Carter to contact the Patourangers. And what happens is that the Patourangers do arrive on the scene. They end up fighting the Lupinrangers, and what does end up happening is that initially Lupinranger throws a card at Bumdalt, which basically tells him, like, let's meet somewhere else privately so that we can do an exchange or something. So that's important because it's a way to kind of set them up so that the Patourangers are out of the scene, and so that there's a way for Bumdalt to get back what he wants and the Lupinrangers to potentially get what they want. So that's an interesting thing to see happen. Eventually they do return back to their base where they discuss this whole plan, and Umika's kind of happy with the idea. Toma's kind of thinking it's a sketchy situation. At the same time, what we do end up seeing is that the Patourangers arrive back at their base, and what we learn is that apparently during the time that the Lupinrangers were becoming a thing and everything, the GSPO were doing research on the Lupin collection items, and they were learning about how, in the wrong hands, these Lupin collection items could lead to complete destruction if they're put in the wrong hands, and they could lead to very dangerous consequences for the future. So they learn of the truth of these weapons. At the same time, because of the fact that they don't know the whole backstory behind the Lupinrangers, of course, what do they think of the Lupinrangers? As far as what they'll do with it, they'll think that they're going to cause trouble, because that's all they're known for. But at the same time, as we know, that's not what they are all about. They're trying to do it for a good purpose. It's just that how they come across makes them out to be bad guys when they're really not. So that's kind of important, and I actually think that that's, obviously going to lead to a very interesting scenario, which, of course, will take some time to get used to when eventually the two teams do end up coming to a compromise and understanding each other, which will come in time, I'm sure. What we do end up seeing eventually is that in the meantime, the Lupinrangers the Patorangers arrive at the scene where Bumdalt is. We also see is that Destra talks to Gochi back in the evil base, where Gochi questions whether or not Destra is actually on their side, or is he working with someone else. The reason why that is because he's going after these Lupin collection items, and there must be some reasoning behind why he would be doing this, that is important to note. He seems to be kind of working on his own in these missions, so that's kind of an interesting thing to see. Eventually, the Power Rangers actually arrive at the scene of where the Lupinrangers plan to meet, Bumdalt, and the reason why that is because there was a tracker in the suitcase which allowed the Power Rangers to know where Bumdalt was. So that's very important to understand. So at that point, the Power Rangers do end up fighting Bumdalt, and that is an interesting occurrence to see happen. In the meantime, eventually, they actually spring a big trap where there's several Portamen that appear, and the Power Rangers have to fight them. We end up seeing that the Lupinrangers actually go from up top of a building where they're actually watching over this whole scene, and they say, well, they sprung the trap for us, so that's at least good. At that point, what happens is that the Lupinrangers join in on the fight, and they begin to deal with Bumdalt. But at the same time, at one point, Lupin Red confronts Patoran Ichigo, basically saying, let's face each other in a one-on-one, and what happens is that they begin to duel against each other. At the same time, what we do end up seeing is that the other Patorangers and the Lupinrangers end up fighting, and the thing is that Patoran Ichigo actually gets the case and the copter, dial fighter. So in other words, they have their opposites. Like, Lupin Reds has Patoran Ichigo's, and Patoran Ichigo has Lupin Reds. They have the opposite mechas that they're supposed to have. So that's kind of interesting to see. The Patorangers and the Lupinrangers that are not fighting in this battle end up fighting Bumdalt and also each other, so that's important. What we do end up also seeing is that the Lupinrangers and the Power Rangers use different weapons. The fight lasts quite some time. Eventually, Lupin Red actually creates a hole in the ground and sends Patoran Ichigo through it, and leads to him falling. Following this, what we do also end up seeing is that Patoran Ichigo basically says that, you were never on the side of good. As soon as you walk the path of a thief, you were basically sentencing yourself to work of evil and just not doing the right thing. And it makes Lupin Red really angry, because he remembers that he only did this because he had to. He reflects back to losing the one that he cared for so much, and it wasn't his fault that he chose this path. It was that he had no choice in the matter. So that's really important, and it really touches him in a sore spot, and he actually gets back at Patoran Ichigo with some pretty big attacks. Eventually, what does end up happening is that Patoran Ichigo summons the helicopter dial fighter, and he ends up traveling with it. Lupin Red does end up using the biker trigger machine, and what we end up seeing is that there's this chase scene between the two. What does end up happening is that they use special abilities that each of their mechas has, which is cool to see. Eventually, what does end up happening in this fight is that Lupin Red manages to get the helicopter dial fighter, so he actually has both the helicopter dial fighter and the biker trigger machine. So that does end up happening. Eventually, following this, what we end up also seeing is that in the meantime, the Lupin Rangers and the Patorangers are met by Destra, and he introduces himself as DeGranio's right-hand man. So that's very important, of course. He ends up fighting both teams, and he shows that he's pretty darn powerful. At the same time, he feels that Bumdolt really didn't show a lot of promise in this fight. So what does end up happening is that he actually summons a golem, and a golem is probably, it's one of those kind of bigger figures that will be used on those kind of episodes where they don't want to use like the main monster or villain for the episode, but instead have like kind of a weaker version of one of those monsters. And what happens is that the Power Rangers manage to get Goody, or Good Striker. They use it to actually summon it and form Patoranger, Patokaiser. And following this, the Patorangers do end up destroying the golem. After this occurs, what we end up seeing is that back at the cafe for the Lupin Rangers, they're happy that they managed to get the Lupin collection items that they did receive, as far as the helicopter and the biker mechas. At the same time, what isn't good is that they weren't able to get the Lupin collection items that Bumdolt had, so he's still on the loose right now. In the meantime, what happens is that Kairi goes out and he's annoyed, and he really feels like Patoran and Ichigo really annoyed him with what he said to him when they fought. At the same time, we also do end up seeing is that in the GSPO that Kichiro is pretty upset because of what happened, how he lost everything that he had. They weren't able to get any of the mechas that they needed. They weren't able to stop Bumdolt, and basically, where the Lupin Rangers are in a pretty good position, the Patorangers right now are in a pretty terrible position. So, of course, he wants to get revenge on Lupin Red for what happened in their fight, and the fact that he doesn't have anything. He didn't gain anything from this episode. So that's very important. Next episode, what we do see in the preview clips is that it looks like the, the dial fighter, which was the helicopter one that they got in this episode, the Lupin Rangers will get to use that. So we will be seeing the first new combination used next episode. As far as when the Patorangers will get the biker dial trigger machine, it's unclear. I would imagine if it's not, I would imagine it would probably be episode 7. That's my guess right now. We'll have to wait and see, of course, but that should be very interesting. Bumdolt again is still around, so likely next episode we'll have the Lupin Rangers using the new dial fighter combination against Bumdolt, but we'll have to wait and see for sure what does end up happening. Again, this is the 5th episode, so we're still very, very early into the show, but overall I thought it was a good episode today. I thought that they had some good stuff in it. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I love to know your guys' opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I am Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.